All right, top of the hour. Good morning, everyone. I'm Poppy Harlow.
And I'm Jim Sciutto. As we speak, 81 people, groups, and offices tied to President Trump are mulling how to respond to a brand new demand for information from the House Judiciary Committee, while the president, who is not on that list, responds as he often does. This morning, he says that the Dems have, quote, gone stone cold crazy, obstructing justice, he says, by launching a big fat fishing expedition. Again, quoting there.
Obstructing justice, of course, believed to be a key point of investigation of the president in the special counsel probe, which the president never fails to attack. But now a former White House lawyer is airing some very different views about the investigation and of Robert Mueller himself. Ty Cobb tells ABC News in a new podcast he does not see the Mueller probe as a witch hunt. Our Phil Mattingly joins us on the Hill. That's really interesting in and of itself. Also really interesting are these 81 names on a list that could be growing. Phil?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler making clear that this was only the first request for names. More could be coming in the days and weeks. But if you look at this initial request, you recognize that this effort by the Judiciary Committee, this effort by House Democrats, is neither limited nor is it subtle. It goes directly to the heart of the president's closest relationships, from family members like his sons Donald Jr. and Eric Trump, to some of his closest Trump Organization confidants, Alan Weisselberg, the CFO, Rona Graff, his personal assistant and gatekeeper, former White House officials like Sean Spicer, Steve Bannon. If you broaden out the whole list of 81, it really kind of tracks into categories, from the Trump Organization to the Trump campaign to the White House, the current White House, and entities involved with the Russia investigation that have been unearthed up to this point. And I think one of the big questions now is, okay, there are document requests. What comes next, particularly if some of these individuals don't cooperate? Well, Jerry Nadler was asked this question by Aaron Burnett last night. Will he consider subpoenas? This is what he said.
For 2 years, the Trump administration has been attacking the core functions of our democracy, and the Congress has refused to do any oversight. They've refused to. They've shielded him. They've acted more as shields than as what the Congress is supposed to do, which is to be a check and a balance. We are going to be the check and a balance. We are going to find out. We're going to lay out the facts for the American people.
So it's worth noting that this is the first step. It's document requests. Subpoenas are very much a possibility. So are future hearings. It's going to be a lengthy, methodical process, but is one that is very much still kicking into gear right now, guys.
Phil, from the groups that have been requested and the individuals, can you figure out a focus, or really are they open to all lines of inquiry here? You know, business wrongdoing, political, etc.
It's certainly a wide scope at this moment, but they've really kind of characterized it into 3 or 4 particular issues. You have the Russia collusion investigation. There are pieces of that. There's corruption. There are the hush money payments that people have been talking about now for the past couple of months. There's the obstruction case as they look into the firing of FBI Director James Comey, and there's also abuse of power issues. You're talking about emoluments. You're talking about greed and corruption. Those are the allegations that are being laid out. Those are the issues that they're going to be looking into, trying to collect evidence, trying to make the case publicly. We'll see where they end up going from here, guys.
Right, if this is the beginning and how big this list is going to get. Phil, thanks very much on Capitol Hill for us. So when asked whether he will cooperate with an investigation, the president says, these are his words, he, quote, cooperates every time. As for the White House, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, well, she called the House Judiciary investigation, quote, a disgraceful abuse fishing expedition into tired and false allegations.
Yeah, fishing expedition, clearly a talking point. Former White House lawyer Ty Cobb, however, who served the president for a number of months, he has a very different take. Have a listen.
I don't feel the same way about Mueller. I don't feel the investigation is a witch hunt. A lot of things, distracted him from focusing on the president, from Manafort's, decade-old issues to, the Papadopouloses of the world and, the Carter Pages of the world and the Roger Stones of the world. So it's not my view that it's a witch hunt.
Caitlin Collins at the White House. Caitlin, so Ty Cobb with a very different approach to this investigation than President Trump's current legal representation.
Yeah, and Ty Cobb has been out of the White House for nearly a year now. And not only does he not agree that the Mueller investigation is a witch hunt, which not only the president but also his allies have repeated oftentimes, he also disagrees with the president when the president says he believes Robert Mueller is highly conflicted to be the special counsel. Instead, Ty Cobb says Robert Mueller is someone he's known for decades, and when he thinks of him as a war hero.
I think Bob Mueller is an American hero. I think Bob Mueller's a guy that, even though he came from an arguably privileged background, has a backbone of steel. He walked into a firefight in Vietnam to pull out one of his injured colleagues and was appropriately honored for that. I've known him for 30 years as a prosecutor and a friend, and I think the world of Bob Mueller.
Now, two other things from this interview with Ty Cobb that stuck out. One, he said he disagrees with the approach that people like Rudy Giuliani and the other members of the president's legal team have taken because he believes they've undermined the public trust in the special counsel to conduct a fair investigation. And two, as we're all waiting for that report to come out, Ty Cobb said he believes it's going to be shorter rather than longer, and he does not think it's going to be the silver bullet that's going to take down the Trump presidency, and he does not think it's going to tie any kind of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russians.
Caitlin Collins at the White House, thanks very much. We're joined now by former presidential advisor David Gergen, advised a bunch of presidents, and former federal prosecutor Lee Wheel. Thanks to both of you. David, I want to ask you here just about the political implications of this, because a lot of those districts that swung from red to blue in the midterms were moderate Democrats. Right. Here you have a Democratic Party now controlling the House, taking a very aggressive investigative posture towards the president. Politically risky, in your view?
I think there is a risk. I'm glad you asked the question. A lot depends, Jim, on what perspective you're looking at this from. There are some observers, like David Leonard of the New York Times today wrote in his opinion that Nancy Pelosi had this investigation under good control, that she had the right balance of zeal with caution, that she was holding back from, and the committees were holding back from talking about impeachment. They were going to do all these preliminary investigations first. That's one perspective, and I think a lot of Democrats will rally to that perspective. The other perspective is this looks like a free-for-all coming just after the Mueller report does not, by all accounts, may not be as explosive as first thought, may not find collusion, and the Democrats are moving now to a broader set of investigations that I think a lot of Republicans and maybe some independents are going to say it looks like piling on, and they're overplaying their hand. My own view is right now that the Democrats may think that with his 6 committees they've got this under control, but that they would be well advised to almost act like a Justice Department and issue some kind of statement to the country, to the people of the country, about what they're trying to do with these various investigations, what the justifications are, and what the precedents are. There are precedents for what they're doing, going back to Watergate, that are important. But I think they need to periodically tell the American people, how does this all fit together, as opposed to looking like we're just in a war against these guys.
Well, to that point, David, we just had Congressman Jamie Raskin on, Democrat of Maryland, who's on Oversight and Judiciary, and he said the reasoning here, when I asked him essentially that, is he said there's been no oversight over the last 2 years from Republicans. That's him making that case to the American people. How would you most effectively approach it? I mean, I know you brought up Watergate. Are you saying something like a Watergate, a la Watergate type investigative committee in a single sort of entity would be the most effective?
In the Watergate, notably on the Senate side, they combine committees. In effect, they organize a select committee that Sam Ervin, a senator from North Carolina, ran. He was Democrat, and Howard Baker was his top-ranking Republican. And it was that committee that is worth remembering that its investigation turned out to be pivotal for the whole Watergate case. It was that committee that discovered there was a taping system in the White House. Nobody knew that before. It hadn't come out in any special counsel report or anything like that. So these investigations do have but not only precedent, but they've been valuable. What I do think is that under all the circumstances and the fact we've had 2 years of investigations now of Donald Trump, that the Democrats in the House, the country would be well served by some sort of statement that is updated periodically about how this all fits together.
Yeah, you definitely sense some impatience. At least you got some experience here, to say the least. You were a lawyer for the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee during the Clinton impeachment proceedings. As you look at this now, of course, you were on the other side then, right? Republicans investigating a Democratic president here. What do you see as the dangers for Democrats?
Well, and Jerry Nadler, of course, was on that committee as well. So he was actually, a Democrat on that committee. John Conyers was heading the Judiciary Committee at that point. So he has experience going through this. And, of course, he saw the political side of that, which was that Clinton was impeached, President Clinton was impeached. But then, of course, his polls were, never higher after that. Sort of, the Republicans did not fare well with that, even though the president was impeached. So I think Nadler is looking at that probably and saying, look, we need to have this investigation, but I think the point is well taken that he should be issuing sort of reports out of the investigation, if you will, saying, here's what we're trying to do. But at the very beginning of an investigation, I think that it's got to be, from a legal perspective, this is what you would do, have a very broad scope to it, because what are you trying to do at any beginning of an investigation? You're trying to find the facts. You're in a fact-finding or discovery stage, and that's what you're doing with sending out 81 requests, and they are only requests now. There are only voluntary requests. I assume that they are going to turn into subpoenas. Why do I assume that? Because of the short turnaround time, only a 2-week turnaround time. To me, that says, hey, we're giving you sort of a wink and a nod, knowing that you're not going to respond in a yes way, right? Because you're not going to do that in 2 weeks. So that's going to be a no. We're going to subpoena you and maybe even compel your testimony and see whether or not you take the fifth.
Yeah.
David, help us understand, because I think Lisa is so smart to bring up Clinton's approval rating, right? That hit 73%. A record high for him during these impeachment proceedings. Is this an apples to apples comparison when you look at the president currently, or is it an apples to oranges sort of look here? Meaning, should the Democrats look at that and learn something, or is this just different?
I think Democrats should look at that and learn something. There is a parallel here, of course, and that is that Bill Clinton, they had impeachment proceedings against Bill Clinton because he was charged basically with having sex with in the Oval Office, but then lying about it. And now we have a president who, on the hush money thing, is accused of having sex and then paying people to hush up and to sort of, in effect, to lie about it. So there is that parallel, but I do think that after 2 years of of additional investigations, Clinton was a much more sympathetic figure because it suddenly happened out of the blue, and he was riding along and doing well as president. But with Trump, he's been mired in investigations since he got into office. So I think the country now wants to have and understand, why are we going to do this? It may be very, very justified, but I just think they need to persuade the people and bring people along. And if they want to get national support for this and not have it turn into what happened to Clinton.
Give some answers. Lisa, before we go, your thoughts.
Yes, and also with the difference, too, is that Ken Starr, who was in the Clinton investigation, the independent counsel, he was able to present his case. Here, we may never actually hear what Mueller's investigation produces because most of it may be redacted, which is why Jerry Nadler may be starting this investigation to begin with.
Yeah, I remember when the Starr report came out, we were all reading it. This may be a very different circumstance.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, right? The difference between an independent counsel and that statute expiring and a special counsel now. Thank you both. Lise, nice to have you. David Gergen, as always, thanks. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell concedes that there are enough votes to block the president's emergency declaration. Next, we'll talk to a Republican lawmaker who not only supports the president's declaration, but was recently deployed for service to the southern border. Plus, he's not one of the biggest names to enter the 2020 race, but Washington Governor Jay Inslee is announcing an impressive fundraising haul. How'd he do it?
And a potential major breakthrough in the treatment of AIDS. A second HIV-positive patient possibly cured for good. There are new details on what would be truly a remarkable discovery, and that's coming up as well. Welcome back. A rebuke unlike anything this president has seen so far. The Republican-controlled Senate set to vote against President Trump's border emergency declaration. Joining us now, one of the Republican congressmen who voted in favor of the president's declaration. He was deployed to the border, we should note, as a member of the Air National Guard. Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois joins us. Congressman, Lieutenant Colonel, thanks for taking the time.
You bet, yeah.
So you said that being deployed down at the border solidified really your support for an emergency declaration. We were following your tweets from there. You tell the story of the Border Patrol rescuing a woman lost in the mountain. You talk about the tracking of coyotes, these people who prey on immigrants coming in. You talk about a big capture of meth. I wonder, though, would a wall help solve any of the problems you were talking about down there?
Yeah, I think it would, Jim, and here's why. So this was my 4th deployment to the border. 3 prior were under President Obama. So to all the governors that are pulling the Guard away from the border, the Guard has nothing to do with the national emergency. That's been going on for about a decade. The Guard is the technology on the border. But what I saw when I was there, and this was my first time doing Arizona, the coyotes, which are the guides paid for by the cartel, the cartel raises money, the Zetas, the Sinaloans, on 2 basic products: drugs and human beings, and they shuffle both of those over the border at great profit, some through the ports of entry, but a lot through the rugged terrain of the border. So what I saw, if we saw somebody and they heard a helicopter or they thought they were going to be pursued, they'd drop these big bundles. We'd pursue the people. Eventually, maybe the Border Patrol would go back and get the bundles. A lot of the times those had drugs in them. You would see these coyotes abandon a group and leave them out in the middle of a desert where there's no life for 50 miles from there because they're obviously afraid of getting caught, and would leave people out in the desert to die, which is why you see 200 dead about a year in Arizona. So I came back and said, because of the drugs and the human trafficking, I support it.
Okay, I get that argument. You're making your case here. The president has made that case for really more than 2 years. I've been going back to his election campaign, but the fact is, Congress did not authorize funds for that wall. Both chambers of Congress did not. How is an emergency declaration to get those funds not circumventing what is the constitutional role of Congress?
Well, it's not appropriating new money, and the Anti-Deficiency Act prevents basically the appropriation of new money. Through the emergency powers, I believe, in having read the presidential emergency powers that Congress gave a president, that he has that authority. Now, ultimately, that'll be decided in the courts. They have much more legal experience than I do, but in my read-through of it, he has that authority. That includes the transfer of funds like military construction and counter-drug. I don't think this year he's going to be able to get to all that. The courts have already ruled
on this. You go back to Truman, right? I mean, this is the first time, and I know that folks will say that there have been dozens of emergency declarations since this law was enacted. That is true, but this is the first time a president will declare an emergency after, Congress hasn't stayed silent on this. Congress rejected the president's request for the money he wanted for this. That's the standard the courts established, and the president would be setting new ground here with this declaration.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it may be new grounds in being able to do that. As I read through, it's within his purview to do it. Because, look, I see this, and this is where it all becomes kind of opinion in terms of whether you support a national emergency. I see this as a national security issue. Not, if this was just an issue of immigration, I wouldn't support it. But the other issues I saw, and now the fact, too, outside of the, the legality of it, that we're seeing basically Democratic governors pull their guard back and say, oh, there's no national emergency, so I'm going to withdraw the National Guard that has been here in some cases for a decade. There is no willingness on the other side of the aisle to work with this. I'm for comprehensive immigration reform. I used to be called a liberal or a moderate in my party because I'm for this. But one of the keys to that has to be border security. And my friends on the other side of the aisle think that any National Guard or active duty or any wall is somehow racist and not compassionate. I think it's the opposite. When you have cartels recruiting people to give them their life savings, to take them on a journey that leads to either sexual assault or death in some cases, that's not compassionate. To give hope that they can make it that way instead of the legal and right way and safe way.
Listen, you've done your homework. You've done it wearing the uniform. You went down to the border. I respect your position. I do want to note that you, like many Republicans, when President Obama used executive authority without congressional approval, you opposed it. I'm going to quote from you in 2014 when the president was considering executive action on guns. You said, time and again, the president, this being Obama, has chosen to push his authoritative agenda with little regard for constitutional process. Why is the president not doing exactly what you criticized President Obama for?
Because you can't change a law on guns or immigration with the stroke of a pen. If somebody was trying to change a law that would be a very different situation than a president saying, I'm declaring a national emergency on the border. I'm not appropriating new money out of thin air. I'm actually switching resources from things like DOD counter drug to actually fighting drugs on the border through this emergency order. And it's focused on things that are a threat to the American people. Is there always consistency among Republicans and Democrats? No, that's something we have to accept. But in terms of what I say and what I see, I think it is consistent to oppose a president that would attempt to change a law versus a president that would attempt to take existing resources and enforce a thing like border security.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thanks for joining us.
Anytime.
All right, so he may not be the best known Democrat who has jumped in the 2020 race, but he made a big fundraising haul. We're talking about Washington State Governor Jay Inslee. Big fundraising in the last 4 days. Washington Governor Jay Inslee says his campaign has raised over $1 million since he announced his presidential bid on Friday.
That is a big haul. The 48-hour haul puts him up there with some of the most recognizable names in the Democratic field so far. Look at them: Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders as well. Let's discuss now with Alyssa Mastromonaco. She's the former Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations in the Obama White House. She's also the author of a new book. So here's the thing: notes on growing up, getting older, and trusting your gut. Advice for young women. Alyssa, thanks very much for taking the time.
Guys, thanks for having me.
So where did this financial support come from? I mean, that's quite a haul for someone who, at least in East Coast political circles, less well known.
So I think I think he's taking some PAC money. I think that, where Bernie was very specific about the grassroots support that he got, I feel like Inslee's money probably came from some more high donors, bigger checks that he probably, I'm guessing going into the end of the quarter, March is the end of the first quarter, I think everybody wants to put up a pretty good number. My guess is he probably front loaded as much of the money as he could so that he put up a big number out of the gate.
Well, look, it has people talking about him, right? In a very crowded field.
Absolutely.
First of all, hello to your parents, Randy and Lydia.
Yeah,
I understand
hi, Mom
they're watching. Good morning, Mom and Dad. Look, Inslee said this morning to John Berman on New Day, because John asked him, rightly so, why are you taking PAC money when a lot of the Dems aren't? And he said, look, these are, I'm not taking corporate money from fossil fuel, et cetera. I'm taking it from people and organizations that care about fighting climate change.
Right.
That is his platform. But when you look at the new, Pew Research poll within the last year or so, it shows climate change is like the 19th most important thing to a lot of voters right now. Admirable for sure for him to talk about something so important. How is it going to work for him to run on a climate change platform?
I think that single issue candidates will be hard. I think that we all agree that climate change is a problem. I think that people also want to hear about fighting corruption in government, getting big money out of politics, which I'm not sure how he sort of finesses that message to people who care. Dealing with healthcare, I just don't know that people will ultimately coalesce around someone. But as we've learned, whether it was in the New York governor's race with Cynthia Nixon, having someone who's pushing an agenda or a single issue really does help to shape the party and the platform of whomever becomes the nominee. So I think it's probably nothing but upside.
The number one issue, frankly, you hear most often is beating Donald Trump, right?
Right.
The one kind of unifying issue. Let me ask you about this, because Hillary Clinton made it official that she is not running, but said that she would continue to advise candidates. But it's interesting because it's not like you have candidates actively seeking that, at least in public.
Right.
We had New Day had a sort of a focus group this morning and asked about Joe Biden, and no one raised their hand, at least in that focus group, for Joe Biden. I wonder if you sense in this field, but also in what Democrats are looking for this time around, that they want a fresh face. They want someone new.
I think there's a real desire for, in the past couple of years, we've seen the same people diagnosing what they think are the problems and giving their solutions. And I don't think that people have bought into that. I think that they want fresh eyes and a fresh mind diagnosing what they see as the challenges in front of them and hearing new ideas. And the truth is, maybe in the end, they will choose someone who is more trust proven, and able to, has been a public servant, has won elections before. But I think that right now people want to hear more.
What about women?
All the women?
Yeah.
The binders of women running for president?
Right, but when push comes to shove and this thing gets closer and closer, is America not only ready for a woman, but how likely do you think it is that a woman has, as the top of a Democratic ticket?
I am very hopeful that, I mean, I think that the most important thing is that we have someone who can beat Donald Trump.
Right.
I think that having a woman saying, you hear a lot of people talk, oh, I want a woman, and it doesn't matter. I want a woman because I think a woman can beat Donald Trump. And so,
Well, like, he hasn't attacked Kamala Harris publicly, which I think is really interesting.
I think he knows that's even above his, like, that's punching above his weight.
We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah.
Beto O'Rourke, had
Sure.
had some momentum. It's faded, and again, this is just in conventional wisdom. He's calling for the national legalization of marijuana. Cory Booker also pushing legalization. Why? Is that a driving issue in this cycle?
I think it's very important. The more, I mean, I'm, honestly very for the legalization of marijuana. It's helped my health. It helps people deal with all sorts of mental health issues instead of opioids and help like.
But there are
stomach
Democratic
issues.
voters who are not particularly excited about that.
It's true.
And oppose it.
There are. I mean, I don't think that any one party has a true litmus test for, we have to have this or we're not going to vote for you. But I think that it is important, especially to millennial and Gen Z voters.
And then finally, this new poll that is really interesting to me, the NBC Wall Street Journal poll that showed 38% of Americans say the system is broken, a third party is needed. That's the highest number since they started tracking this in '95. I think only 1 out of 10 Americans said the two-party system is working really well. What does that mean for a door being more open for an actual third-party candidate? Obviously, Howard Schultz considering a run. What do you think?
I mean, I don't think Howard Schultz is the third candidate party that third-party candidate that they're talking about. I think that right now we're dealing with, an electorate that dealt with a government shutdown that was 31 days. Even if we can say the Democrats won, they stared Donald Trump down. They don't care. The people in that poll don't care. They know that they were worried about where their paycheck was going to come from and that they had to decide whether to take their cancer treatments or pay their rent. Yep. So it's not even remotely shocking to me that people feel that way. The question will be is if there's a challenge to Donald Trump in the Republican Party and if Democrats have a good message, do they still feel that way in 6 months?
Good point. Congrats on the book.
Thank you, guys. Thanks
Number
for having
2,
me.
right?
Second
book. Bravo.
Thanks so much, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Well, we may be one step closer to a cure. Imagine that for HIV. A second person gone into remission. Could this breakthrough have researchers? It's a breakthrough that researchers have been working for decades on. We'll have more.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Scientists do not throw around the word cured very often. That's for a reason. But effectively, that may be what has happened to an HIV-positive patient in London.
It's remarkable. He is the second patient now in remission from the viral infection without the use of HIV drugs. Senior medical correspondent Elizabeth Cohen joins us from Atlanta. Elizabeth, this is remarkable. I was just watching the movie Queen. And, it was just brought back to that time when this was just such a tragic epidemic. Tell us about what has happened here.
Right, exactly. When so many of us lost friends and loved ones and family members to HIV. So what's happened here, Poppy, really is, as you say, remarkable. So this is now the second patient who not only had HIV, but who also had cancer. And so to treat the cancer, they gave this patient a stem cell transplant. And so they intentionally chose a donor who had this very unusual genetic mutation that made him immune to HIV. So they did the transplant with stem cells from that person, and it made this patient in London, now called, appropriately enough, the London patient, that made that person effectively cured of HIV. This is the second time that that's been done. There was another HIV patient who also coincidentally had cancer, and he has not had HIV. It's been more than 12 years, and neither one of these gentlemen is on any kind of HIV therapy. And so this is really pretty stunning. I do want to add, though, they have tried this on other HIV patients, and it hasn't worked. So sometimes it seems to work, and sometimes it doesn't seem to work.
So let me ask you, the circumstance is obviously unusual because HIV positive, but also suffering cancer. Does this, would you, to get the same treatment, would you have to have the same circumstances, right? Be both suffering cancer and have HIV, or could this be a model for a broader set of HIV positive patients?
Right, so the problem, you might think, well, why not just do this for everyone? And the problem, Jim, is that stem cell transplants are very risky. They can kill you. And so if you don't have cancer and you don't need this transplant, you don't want a stem cell, you don't need the transplant, you don't want to get it because it could kill you. You're much better off just taking taking HIV drugs which are very effective and which are very safe. So you don't want this treatment unless you have cancer. It's just not safe.
All right, Elizabeth, this is amazing to hear. Thank you for bringing us that story. I also want to get you on this because right now, happening live on Capitol Hill, you're looking at pictures of Ethan Lindenberger. He's an 18-year-old who is testifying about the importance of vaccinations. We just had him on before his testimony because he defied his parents by getting all of these vaccines. Let's listen to what he told us just a moment ago about why he's doing this.
When you're looking at the sources that spread this information, these lies, for lack of a really better or more accurate term, it's very clear that all the information is incorrect, skewed data. Everything is not cited. And also there's a lot of emotional appeals talking about families and children and appealing to a parent's love and almost manipulating that to convince them that vaccines are dangerous.
Elizabeth, this comes on top of a brand new study that once again shows that the MMR vaccine, for example, is not tied to autism at all. What can you tell us?
You know, this study is really huge. You can see that number right there, more than 500,000 children. They looked at who got a measles, mumps, rubella vaccine and who didn't, and they found that there was no association whatsoever between getting that vaccine and getting autism. So once again, I say, hear this well, vaccines do not cause autism. There's now been more than a dozen studies like this, Poppy, that show it. This science is conclusive. It is done. This question has been answered.
And yet people are still quoting one quack doctor, right, who got this whole thing started years ago.
Right, a quack
Remarkable.
doctor whose own journal had to correct him and retract his work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Elizabeth, thanks very much on all of that. A program that let the NSA collect domestic phone records may be ending. Why the White House is stopping the controversial practice is next.